Chatting away. Yep. Yep. No. Just as you said that, I noticed it at the same time. Hey, how's it going? Happy Friday. Oh, that's the kind of day I'm having, apparently. I just spent the past, hour figuring out how to get rid of that black bar. Oh, except the black bars are still there on the stream. Now they're on both sides. Well, I guess it's not so bad there. I think we've got a little bit more. Oh, you don't see them? Okay, all right. I see them on my computer, but but if you don't see them, then that works out just fine. Are you watching on PC or on your phone or what? Farmo says a little bit of a bar on the top and bottom, but it's much bigger. What's much bigger, the image or the bars? You're on PC. Okay. Yeah, the the image is bigger. Okay. Hopefully that's good. Um, yeah, I was trying to figure out the resolution things for the stream, and I spent the last hour puzzling on that. Hello, Sharkies. Um, Happy Friday. But it's complicated apparently. Firemouse minimizes the chat box. There are bars, but with the chat open, there's nothing. Okay, so it's all just, I guess, at least slightly out of my hands and somewhat dependent on, I guess, the individual person watching settings. As long as the image is good, then, yeah, whatever. Black bars don't really matter, right? Show that image again. We're getting ready for Mirkwood here with flies and spiders. Always am terrible at getting the focus right on these pictures. There we go. That looks pretty good. And that'll be the thumbnail for when I post this to YouTube. So in keeping with Mirkwood theme, I've got the green lights on. I've got my green drink. It's not a black drink because I'm not a fool. Want to keep my memories and not, I want to be able to make it out of Mirkwood. But I think green should be okay. It's green apple even. That's Mirkwood-ish, right? No, there's probably not really apples to be found in Mirkwood. Foresty. Yeah. Maybe a little creepy. Green apple like poison apple is the thing. Green apple like the Hulk, you say, Robokio. Was there a green apple Hulk drink or something? Remember in the Hulk movie. Oh, okay. In the Hulk movie, there was that, what was it? Bruce Banner was working in some drink factory, and a drop of his blood got into one of the bottles, and that was the Stan Lee cameo, was him taking a sip and dropping it. And that's how they figured out where he was. Yeah, some kind of goat skull looking thing in that image. I don't know what a goat's doing wandering around in Mirkwood. Apparently not doing very well. So how is everybody's week? Now that we've reached Friday. I was a little off this week, personally. Not great sleep every day, and so I ended up not going to Kung Fu on Tuesday because for some reason I just randomly woke up at 4:30 a.m. on Tuesday. So I was pretty tired by the time the evening rolled around. I went yesterday. Didn't get... Farmos is having sore arms because of physio. Yeah. Didn't have the most energy yesterday either, but, forced myself to get out, get some exercise. Practiced a set or two, did some drills with a beanbag, throwing a beanbag around and practicing my tiger claw. I hope that wasn't too spooky right there. I mean to scare you, I'm sorry. I'm so fierce. Oh, yeah, yeah, I saw Christine's post about that. A fire in your area. That's pretty scary. That's scarier than my tiger claw. That sucks. I'm glad that you guys did not suffer any personal losses. And it's, yeah, like Farmos is saying, and it sounds like there were no injuries from what I was reading, hopefully. But even so, that, hope everyone had good insurance that was involved. As far as you've heard, yeah. Well, I'm very glad that you guys are safe. Any idea what the cause was? Was it like an electrical thing, or did somebody leave the oven on? Because typically, from my understanding, is you end up generally with less like house fires in the summer inside an apartment. Still to be determined. Like, people don't usually have heaters on and fireplaces and things like that during the summer, so I think there typically are less fires. That is making me notice that I'm feeling a little bit warm right now, so I'm gonna turn the air conditioning on. Cool it down a little bit. Dryer lint, yeah. Yeah, always clean your lint trap. Avoid fires. Speaking of tiger claw, I think the next lunar year is going to be a year of the tiger. My Sifu was just asking. Apparently, we've got a place that wants us to come to a lion dance in like February of next year, which we don't normally get booked that far in advance. I think it was for Hard Rock Casino, and so my Sifu was asking if I wanted to take part in the lion dance. Which, honestly, it's kind of a nice sign. This past year, we didn't have any lion dances or anything because, the pandemic. So it's nice that we're getting to the point where we can rebook that kind of thing. Next year would be tiger, yeah. This year is ox. Then bunny/cat. Yeah. Yeah, I enjoy doing the lion dance. It's fun. It's a bit frantic. I don't know. It's very, you're using a lot of energy and you're underneath the like lion costume, so you get very warm because of course you're moving around a lot and you're staying kind of crouched over. And I usually do the tail, so I have no idea where we're going. I'm just trying to make sure that we don't back up into anyone and following the lead of the head. But it is fun. All right, well, we're 10 past now, so why don't we get started on chapter 8 and venture into the Mirkwood. Show this one more time. Oh, I see. Some places use cat instead of rabbit. Understood. All right. Have another drink of my Mirkwood beverage. I guess we didn't really talk about the previous chapter before starting here. So the previous chapter was Queer Lodgings, chapter 7, and that was where we had a whole lot of Bjorn and his fabulous animals. Um, the the party got dropped off at the Carrick by the eagles, the giant eagles, um, who weren't really willing to take them any further for fear of men and their long yew bows. So they got dropped off at the Carrick. They made their way to Bjorn's residence. Gandalf got himself and Bilbo invited inside to tell a little story, and through the process of telling the story, got the rest of the other dwarves in there. Um, they all had a lovely dinner, stayed the night, and while it was nighttime, Bjorn shambled off in his skin-changed form as a bear to check their story, to find some goblins and wargs to interrogate. And that goblin and warg did not have a happy time of it, and then he gave them some food supplies and some ponies to get them as far as the entrance to Mirkwood, at which point they had to send the ponies back, and also at which point Gandalf revealed that he would not be sending his horse back and would instead be riding off with it, not joining them on their journey through Mirkwood. So at this point, Bilbo and the 13 dwarves are on their own, venturing into some very dangerous territory without the aid of the great wizard Gandalf. So that's where we're at. Yeah. At the end of Queer Lodgings, they each shouldered the heavy pack and the water skin, which was their share, and turned from the light that lay on the lands outside and plunged into the forest. So, beginning. Interesting seeing Gandalf in The Hobbit versus Lord of the Rings, where he seems less all-powerful. You think he's less powerful in Lord of the Rings than he is in The Hobbit? That's an interesting idea. I don't know. Oh, other way around, he seems more all-powerful in Lord of the Rings than in The Hobbit. I suppose they do seem to have had some troubles with situations which don't seem like they should have necessarily been that dangerous in this book, but I mean, yeah, alright. Anyways, they walked in single file. The entrance to the path was like a sort of arch leading into a gloomy tunnel made by two great trees that leaned together, too old and strangled with ivy and hung with lichen to bear more than a few blackened leaves. The path itself was narrow and wound in and out among the trunks. Soon the light at the gate was like a little bright hole far behind, and the quiet was so deep that their feet seemed to thump along, while all the trees leant over them and listened. It's interesting, he doesn't use the word leaned with an ed, it's L-E-A-N-T, leant. Lent? Yeah. All the trees leant over them and listened. As their eyes became used to the dimness, they could see a little way to either side in a sort of darkened green glimmer. Would you describe this as a darkened green glimmer? Occasionally, a slender beam of sun that had the luck to slip in through some opening in the leaves far above, and still more luck in not being caught in the tangled boughs and matted twigs beneath, stabbed down thin and bright before them. But this was seldom, and it soon ceased altogether. There were black squirrels in the wood. As Bilbo's sharp, inquisitive eyes got used to seeing things, he could catch glimpses of them whisking off the path and scuttling behind tree trunks. There were queer noises, too, grunts, scufflings, and hurryings in the undergrowth, and among the leaves that lay piled endlessly thick in places on the forest floor. But what made the noises he could not see. The nastiest things they saw were the cobwebs, dark, dense cobwebs with threads extraordinarily thick, often stretched from tree to tree or tangled in the lower branches on either side of them. There were none stretched across the path, but whether because some magic kept it clear or for what other reason they could not guess. It was not long before they grew to hate the forest as heartily as they had hated the tunnels of the goblins, and it seemed to offer even less hope of any ending. But they had to go on and on, long after they were sick for a sight of the sun and of the sky, and longed for the feel of wind on their faces. There was no movement of air down under the forest roof, and it was everlastingly still and dark and stuffy. Even the dwarves felt it, who were used to tunneling, and live at times for long whiles without the light of the sun. But the Hobbit, who liked holes to make a house in, but not to spend summer days in, felt that he was being slowly suffocated. Farmo says, squirrels seem an oddly benign thing to find in Mirkwood. Well, they've only just entered Mirkwood. Let's see whether they find any squirrels later on. The nights were the worst. It then became pitch dark, not what you call pitch dark, but really pitch, so black that you really could see nothing. Bilbo tried flapping his hand in front of his nose, but he could not see it at all. Well, perhaps it is not true to say that they could see nothing. They could see eyes. They slept all closely huddled together, and took it in turns to watch. And when it was Bilbo's turn, he would see gleams in the darkness round them, and sometimes pairs of yellow or red or green eyes would stare at him from a little distance, and then slowly fade and disappear, and slowly shine out again in another place. And sometimes they would gleam down from the branches just above him, and that was most terrifying. But the eyes that he liked the least were horrible, pale, bulbous sorts of eyes. Insect eyes, he thought, not animal eyes, only they are much too big. Although it was not yet very cold, they tried lighting watchfires at night, but they soon gave that up. It seemed to bring hundreds and hundreds of eyes all round them, though the creatures, whatever they were careful never to let their bodies show in the little flicker of the flames. Worse still, it brought thousands of dark gray and black moths, some nearly as big as your hand, flapping and whirring round their ears. They could not stand that, nor the huge bats, black as a top hat either, so they gave up fires and sat at night and dozed in the enormous, uncanny darkness. Fire would be bad in that many trees and little air. It's uncommon to hear a green, lush forest in summer described as oppressive. I suppose, yeah, the Mirkwood earns its name. All this went on for what seemed to the Hobbit ages upon ages, and he was always hungry, for they were extremely careful with their provisions. Even so, as days followed days, and still the forest seemed just the same, they began to get anxious. The food would not last forever. It was, in fact, already beginning to get low. They tried shooting at the squirrels, and they wasted many arrows before they managed to bring one down on the path. But when they roasted it, it proved horrible to taste, and they shot no more squirrels. They were thirsty, too, for they had none too much water, and in all the time they had seen neither spring nor stream. This was their state when one day they found their path blocked by a running water. It flowed fast and strong, but not very wide, right across the way, and it was black, or looked it in the gloom. It was well that Bjorn had warned them against it, or they would have drunk from it, whatever its color, and filled some of their emptied skins at its bank. As it was, they only thought of how to cross it without wetting themselves in its water. There had been a bridge of wood across, but it had rotted and fallen, leaving only the broken posts near the bank. Bilbo, kneeling on the brink and peering forward, cried, "There is a boat against the far bank. Now why couldn't it have been at this side?" "How far away do you think it is?" asked Thorin, for by now they knew Bilbo had the sharpest eyes among them. Look at that, Bilbo's getting some recognition. "Not at all far. I shouldn't think above 12 yards. 12 yards? I should have thought it was 30 at least, but my eyes don't see as well as they used 100 years ago. Still, 12 yards is as good as a mile. We can't jump it, and we daren't try to wade or swim." "Can any of you throw a rope?" "What's the good of that? The boat is sure to be tied up, even if we could hook it, which I doubt." "I don't believe it is tied," said Bilbo, "though of course I can't be sure in this light, but it looks to me as if it was just drawn up on the bank, which is low just where the path goes down into the water." That's another interesting Hobbit thing, perhaps. Better eyes than dwarves. Well, at least Bilbo appears to be fairly sharp-sighted, although I'm sure not so well as an elf. But yeah, the dwarves have not shown much aptitude for their perception checks. "Dori is the strongest, but Fili is the youngest and still has the best sight," said Thorin. "Come here, Fili, and see if you can see the boat Mr. Baggins is talking about." Fili thought he could, so when he had stared a long while to get an idea of the direction, the others brought him a rope. They had several with them, and on the end of the longest they fastened one of the large iron hooks they had used for catching their packs onto the straps about their shoulders. Fili took this in his hand, balanced it for a moment, and then flung it across the stream. Splash! It fell in the water. "Not far enough," said Bilbo, who was peering forward. "A couple of feet and you would have dropped it on the boat. Try again. I don't suppose the magic is strong enough to hurt you if you just touch a bit of wet rope." A little bit of a risk. Fili picked up the hook when he had drawn it back, rather doubtfully all the same. This time he threw it with greater strength. "Steady," said Bilbo. "You have thrown it right into the wood on the other side now. Draw it back gently." Fili hauled the rope back slowly, and after a while Bilbo said, "Carefully! It is lying on the boat. Let's hope the hook will catch." It did. The rope went taut, and Fili pulled in vain. Kili came to his help, and then Oin and Gloin. They tugged, and suddenly they all fell over on their backs. Bilbo was on the lookout, however, caught the rope, and with a piece of stick fended off the little black boat as it came rushing across the stream. "Help!" he shouted, and Balin was just in time to seize the boat before it floated off down the current. "It was tied after all," he said, looking at the snapped painter that was still dangling from it. "That was a good pull, my lads, and a good job that our rope was the stronger." "Who'll cross first?" asked Bilbo. "I shall," said Thorin, "and you will come with me, and Fili and Balin. That's as many as the boat will hold at a time. After that, Kili and Oin and Gloin and Dori. Next, Ori and Nori, Bifur and Bofur, and last, Dwalin and Bombur." "I'm always last, and I don't like it," said Bombur. "It's somebody else's turn today." Here we go. "You should not be so fat. As you are, you must be with the last and lightest boatload. Don't start grumbling against orders, or something bad will happen to you." "There aren't any oars. How are you going to push the boat back to the far bank?" asked the Hobbit. "Give me another length of rope and another hook," said Fili, and when they had got it ready, he cast it into the darkness ahead and as high as he could throw it. Since it did not fall down again, they saw that it must have stuck in the branches. "Get in now," said Feely, "and one of you haul on the rope that is stuck in a tree on the other side. One of the others must keep hold of the hook we used at first, and when we are safe and on the other side, he can hook it on, and you can draw the boat back." Can't remember how old they said the youngest dwarves were. Wonder if that's supposed to be part of it. Their age, yeah. I don't know why he has... Oh, Thorin could be nice, yeah. Yeah, well, right here we've got Thorin saying that his eyesight was better 100 years ago, so he's at least over 100. In this way, they were all soon on the far bank, safe across the enchanted stream. Dwalin had just scrambled out with the coiled rope on his arm, and Bombur, still grumbling, was getting ready to follow, when something bad did happen. There was a flying sound of hooves on the path ahead. Out of the gloom came suddenly the shape of a flying deer. It charged into the dwarves and bowled them over, then gathered itself for a leap. High it sprang and cleared the water with a mighty jump, but it did not reach the other side in safety. Thorin was the only one who had kept his feet and his wits. As soon as they had landed, he had bent his bow and fitted an arrow in case any hidden guardian of the boat appeared. Now he sent a swift and sure shot into the leaping beast. As it reached the further bank, it stumbled. The shadows swallowed it up, but they heard the sound of hooves quickly falter and then go still. Before they could shout in praise of the shot, however, a dreadful wail from Bilbo put all thoughts of venison out of their minds. "Bombur has fallen in! Bombur is drowning!" he cried. It was only too true. Bombur had only 1 foot on the land when the Heart bore down on him and sprang over him. He had stumbled, thrusting the boat away from the bank, and then toppled back into the dark water, his hands slipping off the slimy roots at the edge, while the boat spun slowly off and disappeared. They could still see his hood above the water when they ran to the bank. Quickly they flung a rope with a hook towards him. His hand caught it, and they pulled him to the shore. He was drenched from hair to boots, of course, but that was not the worst. When they laid him on the bank, he was already fast asleep, with one hand clutching the rope so tight that they could not get it from his grasp, and fast asleep he remained, in spite of all they could do. They were still standing over him, cursing their ill luck and Bombur's clumsiness, and lamenting the loss of the boat which made it impossible for them to go back and look for the Heart, when they became aware of the dim blowing of horns in the wood, and the sound as of dogs baying far off. Then they all fell silent, and as they sat it seemed they could hear the noise of a great hunt going by to the north of the path, though they saw no sign of it. There they sat for a long while, and did not dare to make a move. Bombur slept on with a smile on his fat face, as if he no longer cared for all the troubles that vexed him. Suddenly, on the path ahead, appeared some white deer, a hind and fawns as snowy white as the Heart had been dark. They glimmered in the shadows. Before Thorin could cry out, 3 of the dwarves had leapt to their feet and loosed off arrows from their bows. None seemed to find their mark. The deer turned and vanished in the trees as silently as they had come, and in vain the dwarves shot their arrows after them. "Stop! Stop!" shouted Thorin, but it was too late. The excited dwarves had wasted their last arrows, and now the bows that Bjorn had given them were useless. Bombur's clumsiness, he got slammed by a full-grown deer. Yeah, well, at the very least it jumped over him, and I mean, I've seen other people slip when they've got 1 foot on a dock and 1 foot on a boat. It's not an easy place to be in. I feel like shooting a pure white stag seems to be like a bad idea. Yeah, but I mean, imagine yourself in their situation. They've been running low on food, they've barely been eating anything. I think in this type of position, they're more concerned about not starving. But yes, in a lot of stories, a white deer is frequently some kind of sign, or maybe a guide. And so in this position, shooting at it. Maybe it could be bad luck, but I don't know if that's worse luck than having something to eat. Having nothing to eat. They were a gloomy party that night, and the gloom gathered still deeper on them in the following days. They had crossed the enchanted stream, but beyond it the path seemed to straggle on just as before, and in the forest they could see no change. Yet, if they had known more about it, and considered the meaning of the hunt and the white deer that had appeared upon their path, they would have known that they were at last drawing towards the eastern edge, and would soon have come, if they could have kept up their courage and their hope, to thinner trees and places where the sunlight came again. That's ominous. If they could have. In Narnia, they ate bear meat wrapped around apples when they couldn't find anything else. I don't remember that bit. It's been a little while since I've read Narnia. Bear meat wrapped around apples. Anyways, but they did not know this, and they were burdened with the heavy body of Bombur, which they had to carry along with them as best they could, taking the wearisome task in turns of 4 each, while the others shared their packs. If these had not become all too light in the last few days, they would never have managed it. But a slumbering and smiling Bombur was a poor exchange for packs filled with food, however heavy. In a few days, a time came when there was practically nothing left to eat or to drink. Nothing wholesome could they see growing in the wood, only funguses and herbs with pale leaves and unpleasant smell. About 4 days from the enchanted stream, they came to a part where most of the trees were beeches. They were, at first, inclined to be cheered by the change, for here there was no undergrowth and the shadow was not so deep. There was a greenish light about them, and in places they could see some distance to either side of the path. Yet the light only showed them endless lines of straight gray trunks, like the pillars of some huge twilight hall. There was a breath of air and a noise of wind, but it had a sad sound. A few leaves came rustling down to remind them that outside autumn was coming on. Their feet ruffled among the dead leaves of countless other autumns that drifted over the banks of the path from the deep red carpets of the forest. Still Bombur slept, and they grew very weary. At times they heard disquieting laughter. Sometimes there was singing in the distance too. The laughter was the laughter of fair voices, not of goblins, and the singing was beautiful, but it sounded eerie and strange, and they were not comforted. Rather, they hurried on from those parts with what strength they had left. Hi, Barb. Yeah, lots of green. We're in Mirkwood. The bear meat was in Prince Caspian. Alright. Pork and apple goes alright together. Bear and apple might not be so bad, says Farmhouse. Yep, we're in Mirkwood, so I set the lights to green, and I've got a green drink. Farmhouse has seen some interesting pictures like that with lots of straight trees. Yeah, they said what, it was beech, right? Yeah, most of the trees were beeches. Yeah, beech forests are definitely strange. They're, I don't know, not what I'm accustomed to, so when I see that, it feels a little odd. Festive. We're going for a little spooky, but festive is alright. I suppose there's also kind of a red light behind me over there. Hey Google, set family rooms to green.
Okay, changing 5 lights to green.
There. Trees are beaches. 2 E's, no A. Beech. Farmhouse has to deal with green lights now, but... Alright. So, Barb, if you're just joining us, one of the dwarves, Bombur, fell into a stream, an enchanted stream, and is now asleep, and has been asleep for 4 days. And they're dragging him, dragging him along or carrying him, and trying to make it through the Mirkwood, which they've been in for quite a while. 2 days later, they found their path. I guess Bombur is asleep for 6 days at least now. 2 days later, they found their path going downwards, and before long they were in a valley filled almost entirely with a mighty growth of oaks. So they've gone from beech to oak. Is there no end to this accursed forest? Said Thorin. Is the stream, the picture and everything's okay? I thought I saw some stuttering, but I wasn't paying too much attention. Hopefully it's alright. Is there no end to this accursed forest? Said Thorin. Somebody must climb a tree and see if he can get his head above the roof and have a look round. The only way is to choose the tallest tree that overhangs the path. Of course, somebody meant Bilbo. They chose him because to be of any use, the climber must get his head above the topmost leaves, and so he must be light enough for the highest and slenderest branches to bear him. Poor Mr. Baggins had never had much practice in climbing trees, but they hoisted him up into the lowest branches of an enormous oak that grew right out into the path, and up he had to go as best he could. Everything looks good to everyone? That's good. Plus the eyesight thing, that's right. Although out in, like, above the roof of the trees, it might not be as necessary when they're not completely in the dark. He pushed his way through the tangled twigs with many a slap in the eye. He was greened and grimed from the old bark of the greater boughs. More than once he slipped and caught himself just in time. And at last, after a dreadful struggle in a difficult place where there seemed to be no convenient branches at all, he got near the top. All the time he was wondering whether there were spiders in the tree and how he was going to get down again, except by falling. In the end, he poked his head above the roof of leaves, and then he found spiders all right, but they were only small ones of ordinary size, and they were after the butterflies. Bilbo's eyes were nearly blinded by the light. He could hear the dwarves shouting up at him from far below, but he could not answer, only hold on and blink. The sun was shining brilliantly, and it was a long while before he could bear it. When he could, he saw all round him a sea of dark green, ruffled here and there by the breeze. And there were everywhere hundreds of butterflies. I expect they were a kind of purple emperor, a butterfly that loves the top of oak woods, but these were not purple at all. They were a dark, dark, velvety black, without any markings to be seen. He looked at the black emperors for a long time, and enjoyed the feel of the breeze in his hair and on his face. But at length the cries of the dwarves, who were now simply stamping with impatience down below, reminded him of his real business. It was no good. Gaze as much as he might, he could see no end to the trees and the leaves in any direction. His heart, that had been lightened by the sight of the sun and the feel of the wind, sank back down into his toes. There was no food to go back to down below. Actually, as I have told you, they were not far off the edge of the forest, and if Bilbo had had the sense to see it, the tree that he had climbed, though it was tall in itself, was standing near the bottom of a wide valley, so that from its top the trees seemed to swell up all round like the edges of a great bowl, and he could not expect to see how far the forest lasted. Still, he did not see this, and he climbed down full of despair. He got to the bottom again at last, scratched, hot, and miserable, and he could not see anything in the gloom below when he got there. His report soon made the others as miserable as he was. "The forest goes on for ever and ever and ever in all directions. Whatever shall we do? And what is the use of sending a hobbit?" Apparently I was reading the wrong voice. This is the dwarves. "What is the use of sending a hobbit?" they cried, as if it was his fault. They did not care tuppence about the butterflies, and were only made more angry when he told them of the beautiful breeze, which they were too heavy to climb up and feel. pausing there for a moment, I always like that particular scene where, before things get desperate again, but when he reaches the top of the tree and he looks around and there's, this sea of green that's, kind of ruffling in the breeze and the butterflies everywhere. It always seemed very evocative to me. I can remember being kind of wonderstruck by that when I was young, like reading this early on. So, I don't know. I've always liked that little descriptive moment, even if it soon leads to people being not happy. Let's see how long this chapter goes. I feel like there's quite a bit left in it. Alright, so we are currently on page 185, and this chapter goes until 210. So another, 35 pages, right? Roughly? 80. I guess 25 pages. So we'll read, I think, a little bit further, but I don't know if we're going to finish up this chapter tonight. So we'll just go for a bit longer. Having just spent the last year and a half in a pandemic, the Sharkies get the value of a breath of fresh air in the middle of despair, even if the feeling doesn't last. Yeah, I suppose that's an interesting parallel to draw that does sort of fit. And I mean, even if you do feel bad again afterwards, still that moment of hopefulness does help. That night they ate their very last scraps and crumbs of food, and next morning when they woke, the first thing they noticed was that they were still gnawingly hungry, and the next thing was that it was raining, and that here and there the drip of it was dropping heavily on the forest floor. That only reminded them that they were also parchingly thirsty, without doing anything to relieve them. You cannot quench a terrible thirst by standing under giant oaks and waiting for a chance drip to fall on your tongue. The only scrap of comfort there came unexpectedly from Bombur. Pharma says, and also hearing or thinking about having that breath, but the despair of not being able to experience it. You guys are getting grim. Let's lighten up a little bit. I guess they're getting grim in the book, so I shouldn't blame everyone else. So the scrap of comfort came unexpectedly from Bombur. He woke up suddenly and sat up, scratching his head. He could not make out where he was at all, nor why he felt so hungry, for he had forgotten everything that had happened since they started their journey that May morning long ago. The last thing that he remembered was the party at the Hobbit's house, and they had a great difficulty in making him believe their tale of all the many adventures they had had since. When he heard that there was nothing to eat, he sat down and wept, for he felt very weak and wobbly in the legs. "Why ever did I wake up?" he cried. "I was having such beautiful dreams. I dreamt I was walking in a forest rather like this one, only lit with torches on the trees and lamps swinging from the branches and fires burning on the ground, and there was a great feast going on forever. A woodland king was there with a crown of leaves, and there was a merry singing, and I could not count or describe the things there were to eat and drink." "You need not try," said Thorin. "In fact, if you can't talk about something else, you had better be silent. We are quite annoyed enough with you as it is. If you hadn't waked up, we should have left you to your idiotic dreams in the forest. You are no joke to carry even after weeks of short commons." Everyone's so mean to him. "Oh, hey, Erica's here. Sorry you're late. We went out for dinner. I hope it was good. Wanted to pop in and catch the end. It's Mirk, M-I-R-K, as in murky, as in dim and dark. Sharky says, "That was the missus. As for me, I spent most of the chapter thinking about food. Ended the chapter hungry." Delicious Japanese food. Ooh, very nice. You know what? I've actually been kind of craving sushi a little bit recently. Um, yeah, we are in the Mirkwood. Bombur fell in the black stream and slept for about a week, and now he's just woken up having lost his memory. You're reading a manga where they talk about food a lot. Yeah. And of course, everyone's giving him a hard time because he's the heavy one and no one's ever willing to let him forget it. You missed a pretty descriptive scene where Bilbo climbed up a tree and saw lots of black butterflies. One of my favorite moments from the book. One of many favorite moments from the book, but one of the ones that I always find visually impressive to picture. All right. There was nothing now to be done but to tighten the belts round their empty stomachs and hoist their empty sacks and packs and trudge along the track without any great hope of ever getting to the end before they lay down and died of starvation. This they did all that day, going very slowly and wearily, while Bombur kept on wailing that his legs would not carry him and that he wanted to lie down and sleep. "No, you don't," they said. "Let your legs take their share. We have carried you far enough." All the same, he suddenly refused to go a step further and flung himself down on the ground. "Go on, if you must," he said. "I'm just going to lie here and sleep and dream of food, if I can't get it any other way. I hope I never wake up again." At that very moment, Balin, who was a little way ahead, called out, What was that? I thought I saw a twinkle of light in the forest." They all looked, and a longish way off, it seemed, they saw a red twinkle in the dark. Then another and another sprang out beside it. Even Bombur got up, and they hurried along then, not caring if it was trolls or goblins. The light was in front of them and to the left of the path, and when at last they had drawn level with it, it seemed plain that torches and fires were burning under the trees, but a good way off their track. "It looks as if my dreams were coming true," gasped Bombur, puffing up behind. He wanted to rush straight off into the wood after the lights, but the others remembered only too well the warnings of the wizard and of Bjorn. "A feast would be no good if we never got back alive from it," said Thorin. "But without a feast we shan't remain alive much longer anyway," said Bombur, and Bilbo heartily agreed with him. They argued about it backwards and forwards for a long while, until they agreed at length to send out a couple of spies to creep near the lights and find out more about them. But then they could not agree on who was to be sent. No one seemed anxious to run the chance of being lost and never finding his friends again. In the end, in spite of warnings, hunger decided them, because Bombur kept on describing all the good things that were being eaten, according to his dream, in the woodland feast. So they all left the path and plunged into the forest together. How's that? They decide to send a couple of spies, and then they all get hungry, and they all go anyways. Second or third time they mention the tightening of belts. "Thorin, you don't need to go." I see. I'm not even going to try and match that tune right now. "You don't need to go to the... I said I'm not going to try, and then I try anyways. Nope, stopping. All right. After a good deal of... worth it. After a good deal of creeping and crawling, they peered round the trunks and looked into a clearing where some trees had been felled and the ground leveled. There were many people there, elvish-looking folk, all dressed in green and brown and sitting on sawn rings of the felled trees in a great circle. There was a fire in their midst, and there were torches fastened to some of the trees round about, but most splendid sight of all, they were eating and drinking and laughing merrily. The smell of the roast meats was so enchanting that, without waiting to consult one another, every one of them got up and scrambled forwards into the ring with the one idea of begging for some food. No sooner had the first stepped into the clearing than all the lights went out, as if by magic. Somebody kicked the fire, and it went up in rockets of glittering sparks and vanished. They were lost in a completely lightless dark, and they could not and they could not even find one another, not for a long time at any rate. After blundering frantically in the gloom, falling over logs, bumping crash into trees, and shouting and calling till they must have waked everything in the forest for miles, at last they managed to gather themselves in a bundle and count themselves by touch. By that time they had, of course, quite forgotten in which direction the path lay, and they were all hopelessly lost, at least till morning. There was nothing for it but to settle down for the night where they were. They did not even dare to search on the ground for scraps of food for fear of becoming separated again. But they had not been lying long, and Bilbo was only just getting drowsy, when Dori, whose turn it was to watch first, said in a loud whisper, "The lights are coming out again, over there, and there are more than ever of them." Up they all jumped. There, sure enough, not far away, were scores of twinkling lights, and they heard the voices and the laughter quite plainly. They crept slowly towards them in a single line, each touching the back of the one in front. When they got near, Thorin said, "No rushing forward this time. No one is to stir from hiding till I say. I shall send Mr. Baggins alone first to talk to them. They won't be frightened of him." "What about me of them?" thought Bilbo. "And anyway, I hope they won't do anything nasty to him." When they got to the edge of the circle of lights, they pushed Bilbo suddenly from behind. Before he had time to slip on his ring, he stumbled forward into the full blaze of the fire and torches. It was no good. Out went all the lights again, and complete darkness fell. If it had been difficult collecting themselves before, it was far worse this time, and they simply could not find the Hobbit. Every time they counted themselves, it only made 13. They shouted and called, "Bilbo Baggins! Hobbit! You dratted Hobbit! Hi! Hobbit, confusticate you! Where are you?" and other things of that sort, but there was no answer. They were just giving up hope when Dori stumbled across him by sheer luck. In the dark he fell over what he thought was a log, and he found it was the Hobbit, curled up, fast asleep. It took a great deal of shaking to wake him, and when he was awake he was not very pleased at all. "I was having such a lovely dream," he grumbled. "All about having a most gorgeous dinner." "Good heavens, he is gone like Bombur," they said. "Don't tell us about dreams. Dream dinners aren't any good, and we can't share them." "They are the best I am likely to get in this beastly place," he muttered, as he lay down beside the dwarves and tried to go back to sleep and find his dream again. But that was not the last of the lights in the forest. Later, when the night must have been getting old, Keely, who was watching then, came and roused them all again, saying, "There's a regular blaze of light begun not far away. Hundreds of torches and many fires must have been lit suddenly and by magic, and hark to the singing and the harps." After lying and listening for a while, they found they could not resist the desire to go nearer and try once more to get help. Up they got again, and this time the result was disastrous. The feast that they now saw was greater and more magnificent than before, and at the head of a long line of feasters sat a woodland king with a crown of leaves upon his golden hair, very much as Bombur had described the figure in his dream. The elvish folk were passing bowls from hand to hand and across the fires, and some were harping, and many were singing. Their gleaming hair was twined with flowers, green and white gems glinted on their collars and their belts, and their faces and their songs were filled with mirth. Loud and clear and fair were those songs, and out stepped Thorin into their midst. Dead silence fell in the middle of a word. Out went all light. The fires leapt up in black smokes. Ashes and cinders were in the eyes of the dwarves, and the wood was filled again with their clamour and their cries. Bilbo found himself running round and round, as he thought, and calling, "Dori, Nori, Ori, Oin, Gloin, Fili, Keely, Bombur, Biffer, Buffer, Dwalin, Balin, Thorin, Oakenshield," while people he could not see or feel were doing the same all round him, with an occasional "Bilbo" thrown in. But the cries of the others got steadily further and fainter, and though after a while it seemed to him they changed to yells and cries for help in the far distance, all noise at last died right away, and he was left alone in complete silence and darkness. Good on him for remembering all their names. Well, they have been traveling together for quite a while. We only get each individual name, once in a while, but they've been together for months at this point, I think. That was one of his most miserable moments. But he soon made up his mind that it was no good trying to do anything till day came with some little light, and quite useless to go blundering about tiring himself out, with no hope of any breakfast to revive him. So he sat himself down with his back to a tree, and not for the last time fell to thinking of his far distant hobbit hole with its beautiful pantries. He was deep in thoughts of bacon and eggs and toast and butter when he felt something touch him. Something, like a strong, sticky string, was against his left hand, and when he tried to move, he found that his legs were already wrapped in the same stuff, so that when he got up, he fell over. Then the great spider, who had been busy tying him up while he dozed, came from behind him and came at him. He could only see the thing's eyes, but he could feel its hairy legs as it struggled to wind its abominable threads round and round him. It was lucky that he had come to his senses in time. Soon he would not have been able to move at all. As it was, he had a desperate fight before he got free. He beat the creature off with his hands. It was trying to poison him to keep him quiet, as small spiders do to flies, until he remembered his sword and drew it out. Then the spider jumped back, and he had time to cut his legs loose. After that, it was his turn to attack. The spider evidently was not used to things that carried such stings at their sides, or it would have hurried away quicker. Bilbo came at it before it could disappear, and struck it with his sword right in the eyes. Then it went mad, and leapt and danced, and flung out its legs in horrible jerks, until he killed it with another stroke. And then he fell down, and remembered nothing more for a long while. There was the usual dim grey light of the forest day about him when he came to his senses. The spider lay dead beside him, and his sword blade was stained black. Somehow the killing of the great spider, all alone by himself in the dark, without the help of a wizard or the dwarves, or of anyone else, made a great difference to Mr. Baggins. He felt a different person, and much fiercer and bolder in spite of an empty stomach, as he wiped his sword on the grass and put it back into its sheath. "I will give you a name," he said to it, "and I shall call you Sting." I think that's probably a good place to stop. We've still got a few pages left before the end of this chapter. And we've been at it for about an hour, so I think that's a good spot. With the naming of Sting, which I think is, at this point, quite a famous sword among fantasy fans. Let's see. Bilbo at his most relatable for the Sharkies, depressed because all friends have left and can't look forward to breakfast. Distress eat the way out. Oh boy. Yay, Sting. Elves are so much more fae-like in this book. Yeah, I wonder if those are actually the elves tempting them along here. Because, we are pretty sure there are elves in this wood. They do exist, and there was that hunt earlier on. But this is very sort of fairy fire-like, you don't follow the light in the swamps. It's like that, only more magical, right? They see lights, they go towards them, and then as soon as they see what they want, there's this whole feast in front of them, and it's exactly what Bombur saw in his dream, and it's exactly what they want to see. But as soon as they try to reach it, it all disappears. And it sounds very realistic, but it's hard to tell if it's actually elves playing a trick on them or just some illusion of Mirkwood. I don't remember whether or not they say for certain later on if they clarify that this was the elves playing tricks on them, or if it was just some other magic of the wood. They were warned not to leave the path, and clearly, even though they thought they might get a meal out of it, it did not end well for them. Everything they've tried to do to get food in Mirkwood has backfired on them. The Or they're just delirious from hunger. I mean, that would be quite the group hallucination. And it did, like, they were able to see by the light. They could see each other, and then as soon as the light went out, they fell into darkness and they couldn't find each other, and they seemed to be sort of mystified by that darkness, like they were all acting more helpless than usual. It's funny how in this book, quite often it feels like they don't always have common sense. Sometimes they do, sometimes they make good decisions, but sometimes they don't make what, like, it. They mentioned in this chapter that the dwarves have multiple ropes, and yet they don't think maybe let's all hold on to a rope as we venture through the forest where we keep losing each other. Sharky says, even the forgetting brought about by the murky water reminds you of a D&D rule for the Feywild. You forget your time there if you don't pass a saving throw once you leave. Oh yeah, that's... Forgetting is, I think, a common thing in mythology, right? And with the Fey, you've always got to be careful about eating or drinking their food in a lot of mythology. Right, the river Leith? I'm not certain. Yeah, that, which again, is a river you're not supposed to drink from or fall into, or you might forget. Don't leave the path. There are cool parties off the path. Lethy? Rokio says it's interesting in that way, the way that the elves are sort of Fey-like. I mean, the elves at the last homely house, I think were, they were very merry. They were singing songs and they had lots of information. But I don't know if I would have considered them otherwise to be particularly Fey-like there. Maybe just in their singing. But the ones in the Mirkwood are, it feels like they've got a different culture than the last homely house. It is also sort of interesting how there are distinct groups of elves and they seem to have different personalities and traits from each other, which is something I think that gets, again, borrowed from in Dungeons and Dragons, where you've got all different types of elves there, and some of them are more Fey-like than others as well. Especially in, like, 5th edition, I see that a lot. In 3.5, I don't think the elves were quite so Fey-like, at least in the base books. Mirkwood elves are far less homely, say the Sharkies, yeah. Yep, that definitely seems to be true. And the spider, I'm glad I'm not arachnophobic. That, even without, I mean, I don't like spiders, and if one gets up in my face, it definitely gives me the heebie-jeebies. But this giant spider, pretty gross. But good for Bilbo having an actual heroic moment where he's not cheating or sneaking or tricking someone or anything like that. He's getting attacked and he fights for himself and he kills the spider and he frees himself. And he feels good about it afterwards. Not so much the last homely house, more so the last frat party. Oh, I don't know if that's entirely deserved. They got hosted there for a week and they, were given baths and good food and good counsel. I don't know how often you get good counsel at a frat party. It's becoming instinct for him to be heroic. Oh, the Mirkwood, I see. Well, I guess we'll compare that when we get more of a look at the Mirkwood elves. It's becoming instinct for Bilbo to become heroic. Well, he has had to protect himself many times, and he's been around the dwarves that aren't always heroic, but are at least occasionally. Thorin's shot with that bow at the deer seemed impressive to me. You get counsel at frat parties, but is it good? What's this? Oh, okay. Can somebody, one of the moderators, get rid of that message? It's a race. Let me know who gets them. But you'll figure out how. Good luck. There should be a ban. You know, I can actually just. Oh, it's gone. Somebody beat me to it. All right. Erica did it. Hooray! Nice. It's pretty common. It's probably just a bot, actually. Um, but yeah, some interesting stuff in this chapter. The enchanted stream, which is an interesting thing. I wonder whether that enchanted stream is ever explained. I don't personally remember. Is it just natural magic? I wonder. Did somebody cause that enchantment, or is it just the nature of Mirkwood to have this magic, forgetful stream flowing through it? Puts you to sleep for a week and then causes you to forget the past several months of your life. Poor Bombur, like, actually forgot months of their adventure, like everything they've been through from the party at the Hobbit house up until now. Like, they had, the adventures with the goblins, forgot the last homely house. That's kind of sad. Might be onto something with the comparison to the river Lethe. Yeah, I thought that was. I would guess that was probably an inspiration for Tolkien, drawing from that particular legend. And we've got our first giant spider. Pretty creepy. I know for a fact that those made it into Dungeons and Dragons. Look away now if you don't want to be spooked. If you're arachnophobic at all, I'll give you 3 seconds. 3, 2, 1. Ugh. Bleh. Let's see if it'll focus. It's still on the camera if you're closing your eyes. There's spots on its back. This is from 3.5, huge fiendish spider. Chaotic evil. Apparently that's from 2006. Alright, it's not on the camera anymore. You can look again. Spider's gone. But yeah, so that is a large part of the chapter Flies and Spiders. I think we probably read... Did we read half of it? Yeah, I think we read just about half. I think we're about halfway through, so that'll be good for the next stream on Monday. We can finish this chapter up and see what happens, and where the dwarves have gotten to, and where Bilbo is, and if they can be reunited once again, because they're all separated at this point. So I hope everyone had fun with this chapter. I do actually really like this one. I think it's very interesting. I think there's a lot of neat stuff in it. And we are getting pretty far along in the book. I think we are now slightly over halfway. Let's see. This is the front of the book. So yeah, that's where we're at. We are at... This part is really action-packed. We're at page 193. We just read most of 193 out of 364 pages. So I think we're just slightly over halfway then, because if it were like 380-ish, 386 pages, then we would be exactly halfway. But it's 364, so we're a little bit over halfway. How's that for math? I did a small amount of it, and I think I got it right. All right. Well, happy Friday. 182-ish would be halfway. Yeah. I hope everybody is in for a pleasant weekend. It sounds like some people have got a busy weekend ahead of them. Yeah. And hopefully I'll see you guys on Monday. Same sleet time, same sleet channel. And we'll get on with flies and spiders. Good night. Have a good weekend.